Well, good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing fantastically well this evening. If you could just let me know if you can hear and see and everything looks and sounds okay, that would be much appreciated. And then we'll go through and welcome Dave into the live stream, providing he hasn't fallen over. But enough of that. So, if you could just let me know if you can hear and you can see, that would be absolutely phenomenal. Thank you so much. But hopefully, you're all doing really well tonight. You're having a fantastic day wherever you are. I know it's kind of getting to the midweek and it's slump time, and we're kind of like looking forward to the weekend. But thank you for joining in tonight. It's very nice of you to take the time out of your day. So, can see you, mate. Thank you very much, Rich. That's much appreciated from you. So, I'm just going to bring in Mr. Foy, my sidekick for the evening, and yeah, we'll go over what we're going to cover today. Mr. Foy, how are we doing, sir? You okay?
Hello there, sir. I'm doing very well, thank you very much. Apart from all the woes I was telling you about while we were just waiting to go on. But yeah, the standard, I'm absolutely fine. Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's absolutely chucking it down here in the UK, so it's a lovely evening. But other than that, I'm warm. I've got a drink. I've got great company, and we're going to talk about
Yeah.
bricks tonight for a bit. So all's
You
good in the
you have
world.
I must say you have a very nice new set there behind you.
I didn't pay you to say that at all, did I?
I like it.
Thank you very much. It's taken a little while to get it the way that I kind of wanted, and I'm still not quite there yet. But yeah, it's taking shape. It gives me a second sort of setup to use to kind of break things up a little bit. So yeah, and
Mm.
obviously I do have people complaining that there's no Star Wars pictures on the walls, but they are literally to my left hand side. So they're still here, and they will be back on camera, on and
You
off.
can have mine.
And there we go. There's token ones from Dave's studio.
Just
So
just have mine, you're fine. There you go.
job done, job done. So for any of those crazy people that are in tonight that don't know who you are, which I really don't imagine there's anybody here, but just to be on the safe side, would you like to say who you are, what you know, where they can find more information about you, and then we'll crack on
And where have I hidden the bodies? Hi,
under
I'm
the patio.
Dave. I teach. Basically, I'm an online educator. I teach people how to use WordPress. I'm particularly focused on Bricks Builder at the moment. You might know me from a lot of Elementor teaching back in the day, back in the distant day now, sort of 6 years ago. I had a course called No Stress WordPress, which was fairly popular, and now I'm teaching bricks. And yeah,
Good. You've actually seen the bright side as opposed to the dark side for a change.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so basically tonight we want to sort of just have a little bit of a conversation with ourselves, talking back and forth, and also anybody that's got any questions, we'd love you to kind of throw those questions out there, anything to do with bricks, and please do keep it on bricks tonight. We're not going to talk about Elementor or WordPress in general, or those kinds of things. It's going to be all about bricks builder tonight. So just so we understand and we don't kind of get off base with things. Okay, so basically, bricks builder. Why did you choose it? That's the question, I think.
Yeah, well, we might as well get straight into it.
Why not?
I, yeah, why not? I'm just having a look at. There's just a few comments in there, Paul, talking about your mic being a bit. I think it's your mic sounds a bit weird. I'm not sure there's a lot we can do about it.
Oh, it was me. Yeah, for some reason it's decided to go. Let's try that. Is that better now, everybody? For some reason, it decided to
Yes,
switch over to my earpods, which is what it did for you earlier on. Let me
that's
just
exactly what
before
happened to me as well.
yeah before we go any further, and we actually go back to the original topic. It's one of those things. I was just saying to Dave now. I've changed the studio. I've changed the Mac. I've changed all the setup, so you can guarantee what will go wrong. It'll go wrong tonight. You guarantee it. So now, hopefully,
Always.
everything else sounds okay, and the mic is back to working. So we'll keep an eye on that just to make sure it doesn't switch over for some strange reason. But back on track, Dave. Why did you pick bricks over the
I.
alternatives?
You sound like some lovely, crazy radio DJ now. This is
Smashy and
Paul
nicey.
CFM. Yeah. Um, yeah, I suppose if I kind of rewind as to the problems I was trying to solve by choosing Bricks Builder, I probably most people know anyway. I was pretty known for using Elementor, teaching Elementor. Um, just as a bit of background, I actually kind of used to build websites by hand. I was a hand coder and built everything myself with HTML and CSS. And It was around about the time, I don't know, sort of about 2014, 2015. It might have been a little bit earlier than that, actually, when I kind of noticed this new crop of page builders coming along. And I had absolutely zero interest in page builders whatsoever, because for me, the ability to actually kind of hand code websites, templates, the themes myself, it was just, I had complete control. I had, a process, and having some awful drag and drop page builder, which was creating horrendous code in the background, just didn't appeal to me at all. And I just, decided I wanted nothing to do with that whatsoever. But it was also around that time that I was working, I started to notice I was working with other sort of designers, marketers, just clients generally, kind of directors of companies and things like that, who I started to become part of the problem in the process, because, I was the bottleneck. I was the guy who, anytime that somebody said to me, right, we've got a brilliant idea for a landing page or some kind of new campaign, it's like, brilliant. So somebody else would usually at this point be designing the pages, like a couple of graphic designers that I knew. They'd be knocking together the designs, and then they would pass them to me to Photoshop files and things to create those as templates. And I was the bottleneck, because I was kind of putting this in my diary. I had maybe, I would do it in 2 weeks' time or in a month's time or something like that. And these guys, and quite rightly so, really, just didn't have any patience with that whatsoever. And so they all went behind my back and started just knocking these quick landing pages and quick sites and quick, sort of demo things together using Divi, Avada, is it called?
Avada.
You know the one, anyway. Just these bloody awful page builders, really. But I could see as a business owner and also as a marketer myself, the real value in, ordinary people, not nerds like me, basically, just able to turn these things around. Horribly unscalable, unmaintainable, absolutely, terrible in many, many ways. But at least they were getting stuff done, and it was allowing people who didn't have a hand coding background to be able to put this stuff together and get things out there and test campaigns and things like that. So I kind of liked what they were doing. And so it was then when I decided that I wanted to teach online, kind of, move over to going back to my teaching roots, basically, that I chose Elementor. And the reason I chose Elementor, especially at the time, was because I could see how much it appealed to the kind of people that I wanted to help. I kind of wanted to help, the non-coders, the designers, the marketers, the people who couldn't get their head around code and CSS, the CSS hierarchy and things like that. Yeah. So Elementor was the thing. Now we all know my feelings on how Elementor went. I've been checking it out again a little bit more recently, but back then I built a very, very, very healthy business, and I enjoyed using Elementor myself, a great deal. But the bugginess and the I think it's just really spotting myself as a hand coder and being used to having complete styling control and complete content control, HTML control over everything. The roadblocks that I would hit using Elementor, and I would see other people hitting as well, even like the completely non-coders hitting those roadblocks of, using these kind of pre-designed widgets and just having no true real global styling control, and just doing all this stuff that was very easy and push button, but also ultimately causing them problems. And so I just decided, right, I'm gonna. Well, I took about a year off through being sick and everything else, but and I had a little dalliance with Webflow as well, which kind of scratched my itch of having more control over the structure and having more control over the styling and classes. It's like a real breath of fresh air, actually. And so when I decided that, okay, well, the closed third-party system is not for me, ultimately, came back to WordPress and spent months and months and months just researching different page builders. Now, unlike you, and I admire you for this, Paul, you're actually good at dipping into different tools and different systems, and you're quite happy diving right into something like, say, generate blocks, which is excellent, and using that for certain projects because it suits how you're working at that time or what's required, or just because you fancy it. Whereas I'm the kind of person who I like to find a set of tools, or a tool, a page builder in this case, and just stick with it, get good at it, and decide this is what I'm going to be using for the time being, at least, until the wheels fall off or something extra special comes along that makes it worth switching again. But I like kind of going deep into things and getting really used to it and setting up a system and a workflow and a framework and things like that. And so there are lots and lots and lots of reasons why I ended up landing on Bricks as my kind of builder of choice, and it has been now for a good 18 months at least, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. There are lots and lots of reasons, but I would say just the two broad reasons. One is that this sounds, I'm going to use a negative to describe a positive, but it's because it's not Gutenberg. And I'd spent so long desperately trying to try to use this kind of newfangled kind of using the Gutenberg block editor as a page builder essentially. But long story short, I just can't get on with it. It's horrible. I've spent the best part of 2 hours just trying to move some content across to another column, and then finding that I've got to then just completely create a whole separate column. It's just like absolutely kind of mind melting. So the first thing with Bricks for me was just like a real sense of relief that this thing is easy to use. I'm finding it incredibly inspiring. I actually just immediately felt like inspired to design and to build and to create, which I hadn't had with anything Gutenberg based whatsoever, despite how good the product was. I was impressed with Generate Blocks generally, for example. So there was that, just the fact that everything just worked. I can drag and drop. I've got seemingly control over everything, and it just suits the way that I work, suits the way that I think, suits the way that I understand how HTML works, how CSS works, how they interact with each other, all that kind of thing. So it appealed to my kind of understanding of how the web just works, how web pages work, how web technologies work in the first place. It was a visual representation of what's going on in basically going on in the back end, but still suitable for non-coders. So there was that. And the other thing was just kind of true, actual global control over, I felt like I had control, much more control than anything else, partly over the structure, the actual HTML structure, just the ability we can get deeper into this, but the fact that I had complete control over sections, containers, divs, I could just build everything exactly as I wanted, but also kind of true global styling control as well. Actually, what I'd always hoped for was to not be hampered by the limited global styling options provided by the developer of the page builder. Not have to go into like some whole separate area if I wanted to kind of update global styles, not be kind of limited to just the options that I was given. I know that some tools now have these concepts that I think Generate Blocks, Breakdance. I think I've not looked too much into them more recently, but this kind of concept of presets, which are kind of like classes, but they're still quite limited. I had a brief go with Breakdance. I had more of a go with Generate Blocks, but just that complete global styling control for me is absolutely priceless. at the expense of, well, if it is at the expense, but let's say it is, at the expense of some of the nice, easy push button, create like a nice little layout from some pre-built components. But yeah, I'd say that those are the two main things. I suppose if a third thing would be the mature feature set already. I mean,
for how long it's actually been out, it's come an awful long way. I mean, going back to the very beginning, which is 18 months ago, somewhere around there, to see where it kind of is now.
About sort of early to mid 2021, I think, wasn't it? Bricks.
Somewhere, probably a bit longer then. Yeah, probably was about that. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I kind of like, I mean, I'm going to sort of go back to the comment that Kevin put up, Kevin Geary. So, well, thank you for joining us tonight, and the same for Imran as well for joining in. Always a pleasure to have you guys around. I think drawing a kind of a parallel between something like Generate Press and Generate Blocks and something like, for example, Quickly and Bricks and things like that, they are very, very different tools. They're nowhere near on the same level of feature set. And I don't think, I mean, I think that's one of the beauties, and I think Kyle would probably say the same thing, why he likes Generate Press and Generate Blocks so much, is because you do have a limited set of functionality, but it pushes you to think about things slightly differently. Not to say that it's a better or worse thing, but it is one of those things that I do think. But also, it all depends on the project. I mean, to go back to your point earlier on about me dipping into, like, for example, Generate Blocks and using things like Bricks, I've always had the sort of same mindset of it's better to learn I say two in this example, let's say two great tools, because not every project warrants the need of something as powerful as Bricks. And on the flip side, you've also got projects that go way beyond what you could achieve with a tool like Generate Press and Generate Blocks. So I think having the working knowledge of both of them gives you the ability to sort of take a step back if you're working with clients or working on personal projects and go, this project would be better suited to that. Or would be better suited to that tool set. Do you know what I mean? And I like that little bit of flexibility. I don't want to sort of go down the route of all the different options that are out there, because I think that gets a bit crazy. But I like having that kind of approach. And to kind of draw parallel to what you were saying earlier, I mean, you come from a coding background. So you come from HTML, CSS, probably some PHP, maybe a bit of JavaScript. So very much the same as what I've done, not so much the JavaScript, because I never got my head on it. I was quite sucked at it. But you look at things differently when you're sort of used to coming from things like where you build things in a modular fashion and you use includes to pull, like, for example, your global header, your global footer, you create your global CSS styles, you create your sort of global styling, your definitions, and you apply them where needed. Moving into something, like Bricks, which is really geared around that ability, it kind of feels like a natural thing anyway. So where you're sort of talking on about people that they kind of like, they've gone down, we'll say Elementor, but not just Elementor, tools like that, or Vader, or any of those kinds of things, where they don't necessarily have that kind of way of working, I think that is probably more appreciated by designers, people that want to take the design they've created in a tool like Figma or something and realize that in an almost pixel perfect way, but not necessarily have that kind of requirement to understand global classes where you can just make one simple change and affect your entire website. And I know that Elementor are already sort of talking, I think this is one of their sort of the things that they're going to be doing, is to bring in a classes system. But again, it would have been nice to have seen that a lot earlier on, and I think this is probably where that sort of disparity is between people talking about Elementor being sort of like a designer's kind of tool and something like Bricks being like Oxygen, where you had to be more of a developer, which I don't think you do. I think you can very easily learn the fundamentals of using Bricks, and you don't need to dip into the more global classes and all those advanced or intermediate level functions that are built into it. You can still keep it as simple as you want. Elementor is using containers, which is, and CSS grid, which is no different to what you have inside Bricks. It's just Bricks, if you ask me, implements it in a nicer way. By using divs, by using blocks, containers, and things like that. It's more logical if you come from that CSS div background, where you understand where the pieces go together and which ones you should use when. But like I say, whereas Elementor, you've just got the container, which is the all-encompassing. But it works the same fundamentally. There's no real difference. They're all divs. Container, section, whatever. It's a div with some basic styling applied to it. Full width, contained width, whatever you want. So I think, I don't subscribe to the whole sort of where people say, you have to be more of a developer to understand to use a tool like Bricks. I think we can dispel that quite easily. It helps if you want to tap into the more intermediate features like global classes, like, editing JavaScript and CSS and all that. But the same could be said for a lot of tools. If you want to look at Pinegrow, for example, you can be as complex or as simplistic as you want in a tool like that. Oxygen was the same. You could get away with being relatively simplistic in it, but you would get more out of it when you embrace those more advanced features. I mean, would you agree, disagree?
I agree completely, yeah. This is something I've been thinking about a lot because I speak to a lot of people who are learning Bricks from scratch. So I get to see the path that they take coming in, from builders like Elementor, or they might have been using something like Cadence for a while, that kind of thing, which makes things easy in the first instance, possibly, but just doesn't give them that ultimate control. And I think back to, I was talking about these kind of like designer guys who I used to be working with, complete non-coders. They just literally worked on a canvas and just dragged stuff onto it, and that was it. All right, these guys that I used to work, I can think of two of them particularly. They started using Elementor, and on the one hand, enjoyed the drag and drop nature of just dragging widgets on, and a lot of it is pre-designed and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, so the first guy ultimately understood himself without any input from me. I'm going back a couple of years now, but without any input from me, just kind of realized how ultimately limiting that is, even for a designer, a complete and utter non-coder. This guy, he just works in design, he just works in visuals, but he understood that if he's going to actually be designing websites and be helping kind of build them and maintain them and all that kind of thing as well for his clients, he kind of follows the process all along for his clients.
Yeah.
For him, the limitations of that workflow really hit him, and he was actually one of the people who encouraged me to try Webflow of all things, because he had just gone looking for something different. He's like, I need a system that I can use as a designer, but is actually going to allow me to set up a design system. It's going to allow me to maintain this thing. It's going to allow me to make these sweeping style changes throughout the site. And so he actually landed on Webflow and absolutely raved about it. I mean, you don't know the guy, so you've not got the frame of reference, but I can tell you that is strange. It's quite a bizarre thing. I know Webflow is supposed to be no code, but I would have thought you would have but he really appreciates now that slightly extra few steps that he needed to learn about how web pages are actually built, what's actually going on in the background. It's informed his designs. His designs are now he was one of those classics who would design for the web like he would design for print, but now he's designing actually for the web, and he's designing for how the web works. And then the other guy as well is a designer and kind of like a marketer as well, and he has embraced Bricks. Now that is my fault, but he was a dyed-in-the-wool Elementor user. But again, for all of that, just nice drag and drop of pre-designed little components and stuff, he just constantly hit issues with maintainability, sort of updates and things like that, and scaling those sites when the clients wanted to add new features and new pages and new sections. And that became a nightmare for him as well. Now I basically taught him how to use Bricks from scratch. And so he now uses, it was a bit of a learning curve to start off with, just a little bit, just having to think about, okay, how do I actually build these layouts kind of from scratch that he might have had pre-done for him before. But yeah, he learned that, and then he learned a framework. So in his case, he learned how to use ACSS as well. He absolutely loves both of those. And he's just away. He's absolutely loving bricks. And again, it's making him a better designer. It's making his life with his clients so much easier. And actually, in reality, although he's had to learn, maybe a little bit more of a learning curve, he's now building. Well, actually, he's using. I think he's using frames as well. So he's using ATSS with frames, which obviously work very well together, and also kind of developing some of his own sort of templates and like component parts as well. And he's actually able to build far faster now with bricks than he ever could with anything else. So it's been interesting for me to see how two guys I thought would just be, if you think that bricks is for developers, then it's really not true. And I know that when I have been teaching people how to use bricks, in the first kind of iteration of my bricks course anyway, I actually made the decision to not even look at classes until almost the end of the course. I mean, it's a beginner level course for people coming, straight from Elementor. When I remake it, I'm not sure I'm going to do this. I think when I remake it, I might tackle the classes from the very beginning. But with this way that I did it, it was like you actually, if you proper kind of scalability, maintainability, updates to the site, you are going to ultimately have to understand classes and variables and different things like that. But I actually kind of taught the thing by let's just build it as you would with any other page builder.
Yeah.
We'll build it. We'll add sections. We'll add column layouts. I do use.
Oh, I think Dave's frozen a little bit there. Can everybody else still see and hear? Are we all still online? Could you just let me know in the chat section? That'd be actually awesome. So let's see if we've got a technical issue that supports both me and Dave, or whether it's just Dave needs to put an extra 50p in the meter.
Oh, have I got? Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, yeah.
But have I frozen?
You have indeed frozen, Dave. You have disappeared from sight.
Shall I hang up and then come back in?
Yeah, and stick an extra 50p in the meter while you're there as well, just in case.
Yeah, I've got 50 pence actually, yeah. Hang on a sec. Back in a minute.
Right, well, we'll wait for him to get back online, and we'll see if I want to let him back in, because I'm not 100% sure. He's a bit dodgy. So we'll see what happens there. Okay, so I'm glad to see that we are still online. I'm sure Dave will be back in a moment. But it's quite interesting. I think... bear with me. Let's see if we can get Dave in. We'll accept him. He's put his 50p in. There we go. We've got some movement again. He's back.
We're back
He's
in
back
the room.
online. You are back in the room. Okay. So I think I think I want to kind of go back to what you were saying, if you don't mind, quickly, about your course and how you kind of left the global sort of styling until the end. I can say, I think if you were going to remake the course at some point, or create a new version of it or whatever, I definitely think going down that side of things to start off with, or earlier in, because I think you'd very quickly see, especially people that are coming over from something like Elementor or something like that, I think they could very quickly then see and grasp the benefits of what that gives you. Because like you just said, I think it's one of those crazy things, is like when you start working in building websites in your HTML days back in the day, when someone introduces you to includes and you start to realize you can create one little template file and you can pull that in everywhere you want on your site, and they got one location to make a change. These little things that kind of globalize things and make them very easy to update. I think people would very quickly grasp the concept of that and why it would be so useful. Even if you build it slowly into the course, start off with some really simple examples, and then each module kind of builds on the previous one to expand, and then by the end of it, you do have this good understanding of the fundamentals of using global styling and global classes and things. I think that would be invaluable.
Yeah. I've had feedback both ways actually. I've had some people say that they liked and appreciated that they didn't have to worry too much about how CSS classes worked, and they didn't have to worry too much about creating variables and all that kind of thing. It was just literally concentrating on the basic functionality of bricks in terms of building pages, building layouts, and then all of the other functionality, like, sort of query loops and conditions and all the other stuff. So it was everything but adding the classes in. Now, in one sense, it kind of worked, because by the time that I introduced classes, it was almost kind of a case of just replacing and improving what was already there. It's like, so at this point, remember how we had to kind of duplicate this thing here because, we needed like a copy of it, and it needed the same design and all that kind of thing. I must say, I still used global styling as much as possible, kind of global theme styling, things like that. But so in one sense, I think it helped. It helped because the real need for the classes was very apparent by that stage. It's like, this has been harder than it needs to be. Now here's, this solves everything. But from next time, I think I will. I know a few people said they would have preferred to have just had the best practice workflow in the first place, definitely. And I must say as well, I just feel more confident myself using bricks. I feel more confident in my own kind of workflow, and I'm really, really keen on just making sure that when anybody uses bricks, it depends on your definition of the word, but they have some sort of framework in place, right? And I've been using CSS frameworks going back to, I don't know, I think the first ones I can remember were probably about 2006, 7, maybe, something like that. And then starting to use kind of like the SAS-based systems. And so, there's just all kinds of different things. But using those frameworks was an absolute godsend back in the day. And I've since just seen the benefit of having, a fixed like framework system of classes and just conventions for how things are built, how things are named, that I would encourage anybody, if they're going to develop their own from scratch, just a really, really kind of simple framework, which a system that is just already installed, it's already in place, it's ready to use, something that they've just developed themselves as they go along, as the need arises. We're just talking the basics: typography, spacing, colors, dimensions, maybe. It doesn't have to be complicated at all to start with. But then maybe even going on to, some of the benefits we can talk about, but some of the benefits of some of like the third-party frameworks, the add-on frameworks, the paid frameworks, which, because Bricks is so open, class-based, one of the benefits of Bricks for me is that it allows people to develop frameworks really, really, well, not really easily. I'm sure it's not easy at all, but it makes it a lot easier to develop a framework than it would in Breakdance or Elementor or even Generate Blocks.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I think anybody that doesn't know what we're talking about when we're talking about a framework is basically, if you kind of consider anything you do in a repetitive way. So, for example, your typography settings, like you say, your line spacings, it could be your colors, your color palette. It can be, sizes of divs, for example. You may have a set of sizes that you use for 3-column, 4-column, and so on. You can set anything like that into one centralized location, and then you can apply whatever kind of naming convention you want to it. So you can start off something really, really simple. I've got 2 good examples if you want to kind of understand how getting started with frameworks or global classes, whatever you kind of want to call the sort of the terminology behind it. Kyle did a really good one a couple of weeks back with Generate Press and Generate Blocks. Dave's got a great one, which is to do with this flexible typography and everything. I was watching that the other day. There's some great little links on there. If you don't understand working with Clamp, to make sure you've got fluid, responsive typography, there's a lovely little online sort of setup. And then if you want to kind of go on, or you want to have something that's ready built, then obviously you've got ACSS, which is Kevin Geary's sort of framework. I think there's pros and cons to kind of which way you go. If you kind of build something yourself, you can kind of get an understanding and you can name it so it becomes a logical kind of thing in your head. So when you want to apply something, You've got a set style. You've got a H2, for example, in HTML, but you want to style it like a H4. You can do all this by using those global classes. And building your framework is just grouping all those together into one location and then just naming everything the way that you want. But I think even if you want to ultimately end up going for someone else's framework like a CSS, I still think it's good practice to at least start off with some basics yourself, where you create something yourself, so you get an appreciation for when and how to kind of use it and implement it. And it's not as complicated as you may think. I think anything you need to do repetitively, you could probably move over into a basic framework. So like your typography, your styling, your sizes on different things, colors. A great example is, most color palettes might have 6 colors. But then let's just say you've got black and you've got white. Chances are you're going to use 10 shades of black through to white. Well, you can set those up and then you can just give them a name. And then once you kind of get used to that naming convention, you kind of get used to working with the framework. You start to use that instead of selecting the color itself. And tools like Bricks, GeneratePress, and things like that, they allow you to use all these sort of frameworks and these CSS variables and things, which all sounds quite complicated. But I mean, Dave, I think you'd probably agree, is once you kind of see the basics of how it works, it is just literally repeating it and looking for the best way to implement it to give you the most flexibility moving forward.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the difference, I think, between using a system where you're at the mercy of the page builder developer versus a system which is kind of completely open and flexible, where you can create your own framework for consistency. For every time you build a site, you've got exactly the same like naming convention. I mean, the sort of like fluid, like typography, font sizes, fluid spacing. I think those are the two like absolute essentials, really.
Yeah, the basics you want to get in there.
Yeah, I mean, you still do need with Bricks. Unfortunately, at the moment, you still would need to use a separate tool. Like in the YouTube video I did, it was a couple of weeks ago now, but on building a typography framework, it was very basic. It missed out quite a lot of stuff. I didn't include line heights. I didn't include, any kind of thinking about typographical spacing or anything like that. But even just creating a type scale with some text sizes and some heading sizes that you can then assign classes to. You can then use those classes in the builder really, really easily. Just stuff like that, I think, is something that I think is worth anybody. And it's one of the reasons why I mean, in one sense, you could set up a system like that and use it anywhere, because you're talking about default web technologies. You're talking about CSS and variables, custom properties. But the fact is, you can't port that to different systems. I did a talk at the Page Builder Summit, I think at the beginning, sometime was it in September, and I was trying to teach a basic typography and spacing framework as well. So, I mean, by spacing framework, I mean very simple section padding. Yeah. So some default section padding, some bigger, some smaller, and then also just gaps. Consistent. How are you defining your gaps in between your columns in a grid, right? Very, very simple stuff. And because I'm not using all these other tools all the time, I'm kind of pretty much using Bricks all the time. I thought that maybe what I was teaching would be universal enough for anybody to be able to use in pretty much any builder. Because I mean, it's, you're just adding some CSS code centrally, and hopefully the system allows you just to use a class. But so many people got back to me and said, no, you just can't do that in whatever builder. It's just not possible. And I'm like, oh, right, okay.
Yeah, they have to have that support there. I think the thing is, though, I think there's probably going to be more builders will be able to allow you to port it from one to the other. Because like you say, because it's fundamentally CSS variables, CSS definitions, as long as you've got a builder that uses or allows you to use those variables, you should be able to pull them in and use them, because you are just literally using standardized spacing, whether it's clamp or whatever you're kind of using. And the one thing I forgot to say, if anybody isn't sort of sure what the framework is, the one key benefit of it is that if you want to make a global change, you just change that definition or that type scale, for example, inside that one file, and the entire site will reflect those changes where it's using those CSS variables and so on. So that's one of the sort of key benefits of it. But I think it's going to expand. Like I say, I think more builders are going to start supporting, variables. You're going to start supporting all those kinds of things. So we will be able to take the benefit from those sort of CSS or those frameworks that we kind of develop. So I think it's definitely the way forward. And I think kind of embracing it, learning it, like I say, even if it's the most fundamentals to start off with, it will pay dividends in the long run. Whether you stick to something you build yourself or you move on to something that ultimately would have a learning curve because someone else has developed it the way they want to develop it.
I mean, for me, it's partly the easy maintenance in future because I'm just using a system. I mean, the framework stuff as well is so helpful because if you've got this type scale it's using fluid responsive typography, you don't actually have to think about anything at all. You literally don't have to make any decisions about font sizes or breakpoints or anything else. It's just done. And to take away, so that just makes it easy to maintain in future because you don't have to look back and think, oh well, what system was I using at that time, or what sizing did I decide to use at that time? The framework is kind of doing all the decision making and the hard work for you in the background, but it's also just easier because. If it's you just don't have to think about this stuff, and then you create another site and you don't have to think about it, and you create another site and you don't have to think about it. Whether you've developed your own system bit by bit, or you're using something like Core Framework or Oxyprops or ACSS. I know people ask me quite often, do I need to use a framework with bricks? And my answer is always, absolutely not.
No,
definitely not. You don't need to at all. You don't need to use classes at all. If you don't want to, you can throw together pages and designs quite happily to your heart's content.
And that probably works fine on a smaller site. But I think when you start to get into the bigger sites, then people would probably start to see the limitations of working, outside of using some kind of framework. Like you said, the sort of the global styling system that is inside bricks is limited because you can effectively style one element, but you might be using multiple versions of that element, and therefore you kind of have to start overriding things. Whereas with a class-based sort of framework, you have more flexibility where you can just sort of pull in whatever definition you want and apply it to that and not be limited to just the one sort of instance of that styling, if that makes sense, like for the containers and the divs and the blocks and things. So it's a good starting point, but I think you very quickly start to see the limitations of that in the same way you probably see the limitations in doing a similar kind of thing in a tool like Elementor, which currently doesn't support any kind of global classes or a class-based system, which obviously is a limitation. But that kind of leads me on to my next question then. What do you think is currently missing in bricks? What do you think is its weak point or weak points that you would like to see pushed forward and maybe have those improved upon? Do you have any?
Well, when we were talking about why we've chosen bricks and why we love bricks so much, and the fact is that bricks is far from perfect. Very, very far from perfect. I mean, there have been some fairly buggy releases recently, which, to be fair, have been patched very quickly as well. But I think for me, there were probably all kinds of different things, like different niggles, which I have sort of got used to a little bit. Like as I'm using it, you kind of work around them, and I think for me, a bit of a pain for me is currently the template system. I'm finding that it's just not so easy to. It's just not so easy to use. It's not so easy to, let's say that I might be using like a template. I might be using like templates I've developed myself. I might be using a template library, like Frames, for example. Or there's Bricks. There's a few, aren't there now? Bricks.
There's quite a few, yeah.
Which we can talk about those in a bit actually. But yeah, it's just not so easy to browse templates, to be able to sort of see how templates, what they look like. I know you can have a preview image, but I just think generally the whole kind of template editing process could be improved upon.
Feels like a bit of an afterthought kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it does. And I don't know, there's all kinds of, I think a lot of the issues that I have with like native bricks, and I would always say to people, you do not need any other add-ons to use bricks effectively. So I'm not advocating for using other add-ons, but I think other add-ons do plug quite a few of the gaps that there are in bricks. I know there's quite a bit of ACSS functionality, which just makes bricks so much easier to use than it is by default. There's Advanced Themer as well. I mean, Advanced Themer is you've made a video or two on Advanced Themer, but that is just such a, it's growing hugely in terms of its features.
It's crazy that it's version 2.0 already.
Yeah, so many features coming in all the time, but just so many little quality of life improvements about, certainly around kind of using classes, around kind of global class management, about class renaming and copying of styles, and especially if you get into kind of like BEM class naming, there are lots and lots of features. ACSS has some similar sort of BEM, automatic BEM naming feature stuff now in there as well. So if you're using that kind of thing, those tools really plug those gaps. And I partly like the fact that Thomas and the developer and his team are not rushing so much to be constantly throwing out huge new features and, constantly kind of changing things. I feel like mostly for me and my own use case anyway, they seem to be focusing on developing the right stuff. I think there are still some quite big rocks for them to develop. There was the whole kind of menu builder thing earlier this year, which I still think is quite clunky. It's fairly heavy duty and heavy clunky. That pretty clunky, that thing.
It's not the smoothest thing to kind of get your head around. It feels like there's an awful lot of steps to do some things that are relatively simple. And again, I think that kind of feels very similar to like where you deal with full site editing. If you get into anything to do with that, the menu build inside of that is bloody awful. So I think there's room for definite improvement when it comes to the menu structure, the mega menus and things for sure.
Yeah, definitely. But I do generally like what the kind of like the core bricks team are working on. And there's a lot of the stuff like the kind of much more kind of quality of life builder improvements and class management improvements that certainly in Advanced Themer are plugging those gaps in really well. So with the class side of things, it would just be nice to be able to open up a panel that has all the classes listed in there, and you can just click to edit, as opposed to having the little drop down in the top left-hand corner, which kind of feels like if you've got a lot of classes in there, that becomes an awful lot of sort of faffing about just to find what you're looking for. Whereas just a panel on the right-hand side, especially if you can search inside there, those kinds of things, would just make life a little easier. So then it's just visually there in front of you whenever you need it. Just open that panel up and job done. Unless I'm missing something, which I could well be. Yeah, possibly.
Okay, so I'm conscious of the fact that we've been talking for like 50 minutes, and if anybody's got any questions before we sort of start to wrap things up a little bit in the imminent future, just do #Q. #Q just makes it easier for me to be able to sort of search through and find any questions whatsoever. But I think we've had sort of like a really interesting sort of conversation so far. And like I say, I think Bricks is definitely going in the right direction. Yes, it is far from perfect, but I think what they're doing and the way that they've developed it is definitely moving in the right direction, because they listen to what people want and they make logical, sensible decisions about what to design and implement. And I totally understand when comments get sort of thrown around saying like, well, it's easier for them to make changes. If you think about it, if you look back to right at the beginning when it was originally released, you had like the container, then the container moved over to something else, and then the container expanded into the container, the block, the div and sections and so on. And yes, that probably wouldn't have been so easy. So I think their ability to do that with a smaller sort of user base has definitely benefited them. But I mean, I kind of think, and I would like to see just a little bit more when it comes to the dynamic side of things. That's the thing for me. It's like, I do love the fact that we don't have to rely upon third-party tools to do some of what I would consider fundamental things. And I think that's one of the big strengths about something like Bricks Builder as over, that requirement by some other tools where they need a third-party plugin to be able to do, things like repeater regions, things like nested repeaters, things like, different ACF functions. It's also good to see that it actually supports more than just ACF straight out of the box. So if you want to use MetaBox, you can use all those kinds of things. I mean, do you deal much when it comes to the dynamic side of things, or are you sort of more sort of outside of that where you sort of like you don't have that need for it?
I've not been using a huge amount of dynamic functionality, actually. I've been using, like, obviously just the basic stuff in my sites that I've been building. I'm doing kind of fairly basic listing and single post stuff.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of custom fields. I've done quite a bit of stuff like with repeaters, but I'm not doing anything kind of crazy complex. There's never anything in what I'm building that I tend to be more concerned just in terms of like my own kind of like learning and my own teaching other people as well, which is kind of my main thing. Tend to be more focused on getting the basics in place, and
Yeah.
But I know that you delve far, far more into the dynamic stuff than I do. In terms of, like if you're sort of thinking in terms of like, we'll just take Elementor, for example, and Elementor's requirement for other plugins for a lot of the dynamic stuff, like the Crocker blocks, Jet Engine and stuff like that. Where are you seeing the gaps in Bricks functionality at the moment that you'd like to see, so that you wouldn't need like an extra third-party tool?
At the moment, there's not that many gaps in it. It would be nice to sort of open up the ability to make it easier to deal with things like front-end forms and things like that, so you can have more access to functionality on the front end. Because, I mean, some of the things I'm sort of seeing in the conversations that are kind of going on tonight and sort of comments that have kind of come up over, over months and months and months is that, Bricks isn't necessarily that well sort of easily set up then to give a handoff to clients. So therefore, it's like you need to be a bit of a designer developer if you want to hand off to clients. Well, one of the things that I kind of find is that a lot of people only want to make simple changes. So giving them access to the back end isn't necessarily something they need to have access to. So I would like to see easier native support or full native support for front end, having front end forms so you could build your own dashboards, custom dashboards, and give you full access to all the functionality there. It would be even nice if you could sort of tie into some of the features that are on the back end, but pull them to the front end, so like native sort of WordPress dashboard kind of features. You could bring those to the front end to make it sort of more useful, even be able to sort of slim down and cut down the Bricks editor to something really simplistic where you could maybe just pull in templates that you pre-built and give people access to those kinds of things, but it's just done from the front end. So you can lock it down to what you need, but you can still then control what end users could do without giving them access to the back end and giving them access to Bricks itself.
Yeah, because this is something that Elementor does to an extent, isn't it? You can give people access to certain, if memory serves anyway, access to certain pages with just content editing capabilities, but they can't actually change any of the design and stuff like that. I mean, people often say that they're worried about how a client would deal with the Bricks editor.
Yeah.
But I mean, my response to that is always, why are you giving a client access to the back end of Bricks? It's a professional builder. Yeah. I mean, I personally wouldn't have ever given a client access to Elementor's builder either. But I can understand the need to give clients sometimes. I would say that like a lot of the time, a custom post type is in fact most of the time custom post types are the way to go, because most of the content on a website should be repeatable.
Yeah.
I mean, everything, all your kind of services pages and whatever else. But yeah, just those odd instances when they do need to access and edit just individual kind of standalone content.
I mean,
that would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, a good example would be, I did a video probably about like 18 months ago, maybe 2 years, or maybe longer than that. And it was using a couple of plugins. One was called Dynaments Rexy, which is, it was great because you could use like ACF functionality. Like, for example, you've got, what are they called? Let me just make sure I'm talking. Oh, right. Bear with me a second. Okay. So it was like, you could sort of easily go in and kind of create your own mini, like a mini builder. So you could kind of control what you wanted. So it was flexible content fields. I could not think of the name of it. So what you did was you could create your flexible content fields, and you could give people access to those on the front end. And Dynaments Rexy would allow you to create little template designs for each of those individual kind of pieces. So then what you'd have is people could build up from these component building blocks on the front end, and they would be styled consistently through Elementor. And then they could they could build a page. Imagine like a simplistic Gutenberg, but you would just literally pick the block that you want, fill in the relevant details, whether it's like a gallery block or a heading block or whatever. And it was a nice way of being able to, you could completely lock down what they would have access to. So they didn't see the back end, couldn't log into the dashboard, but they would get that benefit of being able to create or use those building block elements, and that they couldn't cock things up because all they would do was fill in boxes, and there was a lot of control with that.
This was how there's a CMS that I used way back in the day called Craft.
Okay.
And Craft CMS had this concept of blocks, way before Gutenberg blocks. But that was the whole point of those, that you as the designer and the developer created all of these different components, different sections, but then locked down the ability for the kind of content that could be added to them. So the client could kind of use them like building blocks, really, to create whatever they wanted according to your rules. It was quite a kind of like a developer-y sort of tool, but the actual kind of front-end client interface was lovely. And
easy.
I've missed that in WordPress, actually. So it's interesting that there is something like that.
Well, there was. Unfortunately, that sort of the project got shelved. So it ended up being a case that the Dynaments Rexy kind of was no longer developed and no one picked it up.
Right.
But I do think that was one of those things. It was a nice way of being able to give control. Because you think about it, most users, let's just say, for example, a typical user, you build a website for them. They've got an online shop, for example, or so take out the products, they want to create some pages, they've got a sale going on. Well, you could literally there's a sales banner block, so you fill in the relevant bits, upload your pictures and stuff. Then you just subhead and your call to action, you click through to your links and stuff like that, whatever you wanted. And then they could just build the bits up they wanted and drag them around because ACF, sort of allows you to have that with a flexible block, so you can move them around as you see fit. It would be nice to have just more control over that sort of the front end features and being able to sort of take some of those more advanced features over to the front end and give people access to those kinds of things. It would kind of be like that halfway house then, no admin access, can't mess about with bricks itself, but you can still have enough flexibility to be able to create nice things. And you as a designer or developer, you could then, if the client comes along and says, actually, we need these X, Y, and Z features, you just build the blocks for them, add them in. They have flexible blocks. They can start using them in their designs and bang. It can be done in 20 minutes, So it would be nice to have something like that. But I'm conscious of the time. I don't want to keep you all evening. So I'm going to go to some of the questions now. So we'll take a couple of questions. Right. Let's have a little look. What did I see? Where was the one I thought was quite useful? So, John, for anyone joining in who might be coming over from Elementor, where would you recommend learning the framework, class system, etc.? I mean, first of all, I would say take a look at Dave's recent video, because I think there's definite mileage to get your feet wet with understanding something as simple as a flexible typography framework. And that's going to kind of teach you the basics of what a framework can do. But then there's so much more you can do. I mean, Dave, what would you suggest?
Yeah, I think that it does give you the idea of not only the framework itself, but the problem that it's solving as well. So I think also, I think there's a lot of really good information in, I mean, it is a paid product, but there's a lot of really good information in Kevin Geary's ACSS training as well. I mean, it's training on using the ACSS framework, but I do think you get a really good feel there for actually the point of a framework and what kind of problems that a framework is solving and the kind of things that you can do with it. Yeah, I can't think of anywhere kind of specifically that would be just about that.
Yeah, I think, John, what I would suggest would be not a specific kind of anyway to kind of learn it. I think find something like Kevin's or like Dave's, just so you can see what a framework does in its most basic format and how you can start to implement that into something like Bricks. And then once you kind of understand that foundational, fundamental kind of reason for using it and how to get started with it, I think you'll probably find then as you start to build things using that tool set, you'll start to realize actually it would make more sense if that wasn't being done inside Bricks itself, that I actually push that over into my framework, because it means that I can change that so much quicker. In the same way that once you start to understand how templates work, you won't build every single page. You'll create templates for repeatable elements, knowing that you can edit that one template and everywhere else will change. Your headers, your footers, those kinds of things. It's all the same kind of principle. And there's no rocket science about it, I don't think. It's just understanding the basic fundamentals of how a framework works and how you implement it. And then you can just kind of go on your own, I would say.
Yeah. There is also as well, I'll just a shout out again with Kevin Geary's Page Builder 101 series recently on YouTube, because he covers, if you're talking about the core principles of web design, I think he uses Bricks Builder pretty much throughout, but that's not really the point. It's more about the kind of the core principles. And I know Kevin in that series goes like step by step through using, like, if you're talking about learning how to use classes and how to use those efficiently, then I think Kevin's Page Builder 101 series is brilliant.
Awesome. So there you go, John. You've got a couple of examples now. You can go off and you can sort of sit down, get your cuppa out and sit down and have a little watch through it. I've got to be honest, like I say, they are things that will change the way in which you look at building your next website, because they do make the whole process so much quicker than doing everything, repeating the same thing over and over again. It's definitely worth, investing the time in learning those things. This is a slightly different question, but from Imran. How long did it take you to create your Bricks course, Dave? How long is a piece of string?
How long is a piece of string? Hey, Imran, I think that it probably took about sort of 2 to 3 months overall from beginning to end. But at the time, because it was the first version, I was kind of learning how to teach Bricks as well. So, kind of coming from just teaching a completely different tool to something like Elementor. So there was probably quite a lot of stopping and starting because it was a pre-sale. So I kind of pre-sold the course, and then I was building the course, but publishing lessons and potential lesson outlines and things like that to the people who had pre-ordered the course. So I was kind of getting a lot of feedback as well. And so kind of changing a few things as I went along. When I remake it, it will, because I'm gonna do kind of, I think January, February next year, just kind of have a complete blank slate and just remake the whole thing from scratch, just encompassing everything I've learned since, all the feedback that I've had and everything else. I imagine that it would probably still take about 2 to 3 months, because I'll want to cover more. I want to cover more stuff in depth, but I'll have. I'm much more confident about the workflow and the system that I want to teach and the order that I want to teach things in as well. But yeah, for me, making courses just takes time, and I tend to, everything else has to go by the wayside while I kind of focus and get the thing done.
Yeah, I think whatever timescale you set on it, triple it, and that'll give you a better indication. Like they say, when you come to build in, whatever price you think, triple it, because that's what it's going to end up costing you, not what you think it's going to cost you.
Yeah, that's what my wife does actually. She asks me quite often, like, how long do you think that's going to take then? And I answer it to the best of my ability. It's going to take a couple of weeks. And she then does the calculation. She's like, so that's right. Oh, 3 months then. Great. And she is always bang on for some reason.
Yeah, probably from understanding exactly how long these things take. So
Yeah. She's seen it many, many, many times.
she probably has. So Kevin's got a lot of love in the sort of the video tonight. So what's the biggest aspect of bricks that you feel needs improvement? What would you think? I mean, I think we kind of covered this a little bit, but if it was pinpointed to one, what's the one thing you think that really just grips my, yes?
Well, as I said earlier, for me, the main thing that on a day-to-day basis is just the template library, just being a bit clunky, really. I would really like to have a system where almost you've got, I don't know how it would work, but something that just allows you to see the templates much, much more easily. Be able to kind of see them as more like a gallery. I know that on the frames, on Kevin's frames website, for example, there's now a really kind of lovely visual library of all of the templates and the components. Yeah. I know if you go to Bricks Maven, which is another template set, which I think also uses ACSS, and I think there's the option to use Core Framework as well, as your kind of framework engine, so that when you bring the templates into your site, they're going to use your framework system, which is another reason why it's so, I think Bricks is just so useful, because it makes using a framework so much easier than any other builder, which then means that when you bring templates in which use those frameworks, those templates are going to automatically have your sizing, typography, spacing, everything else. But both of those sites, I think, just do the job of visually showing you the components, so that you can just go down and see, right, I want to see all, I don't know, testimonials or call to actions or service sections or whatever, and just instantly be able to filter them down to see really nice visual view. Click a button and you just get this kind of instant preview, and it's just much more easy to see. I just find the template library is functional,
Yeah. I don't think this has ever been a particularly integral part of the whole Bricks. I mean, at the end of the day, probably for the first 18 months of it being around, they had probably, about 12 templates in there. And then they opened up the community options where you could have external templates and things. So you kind of think, I get the feeling that that's not their focal point at all. If you want to sort of have templates, they're either external or, you build your own kind of thing. So I think that's definitely a sort of a, not their priority. But we've got a question here.
Be able to also be able to pull in multiple remote template libraries as well if you wanted to. I think there is an add-on plugin that allows you to do that. I've not looked at it, but yeah, just the whole template in library. If I had to pick one thing.
Fair enough. Okay, we've got a good question here from High Times. What about lock-in? Change page builder, does it equal rewrite the site? WordPress's heading with Gutenberg take quickly, for example. In other words, I'm assuming the question is, if, for example, you build your site with Bricks and then you decide to go down the different route, for example, you go down Gutenberg and you want to go down that route, do you have to start from scratch again? What content does it actually leave behind? Because, I mean, if you look at things like Divi and Visual Composer and stuff where they were tag-based, or shortcode based, once you turn those off, you just got probably more tags in there than you got content. And while I think things have moved on, I still think there's a certain level of, if you move from one tool to another, you are going to have to either start again, or you're going to be left with just basic plain content that you're going to have to rebuild in style.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bricks does have. I think it's had this from almost the beginning, as far as I can recall. One of the selling points is that you can convert from Bricks to Gutenberg blocks and back again as well. So it's something that's quite attractive to a lot of people, is that they can use Bricks Builder now, but there isn't necessarily the huge lock-in. Now, there's going to be some kind of lock-in, isn't there? Because if you're relying on bricks functionality, in terms, let's just take element conditions or, query loops or something like that. If your site is built using that functionality, then, you're gonna have to rebuild some of the stuff using a different kind of functionality. But the fact is that even if you're using Gutenberg, there are not many people that are using the pure block editor and the default blocks that come with WordPress. No. Most people have to use some kind of add-on to make the thing even vaguely usable. So we take generate blocks, for example, so you're still going to have, let's say, even if you built your site using generate blocks, then you decided to use quickly. There's still going to be some kind of transition from using one tool to another. I don't think you can't get around that.
No, there's always going to be limitations because you're using sort of native technology and native features inside that particular tool when you kind of move it. Plus the fact that if you kind of consider Bricks is the builder and it's the theme, so once you kind of change themes and you remove Bricks, which you'd have to do, there's going to be remedial work there. The level of that, I suppose, depends upon what you've used and how you've built the site around it. Simple sites probably would be relatively simple, but more complex, more work. So there's going to be some form of lock-in, but unless you're creating things in pure HTML and CSS and JavaScript code, you're always going to have that no matter kind of what you use, I would say. Okay. So we've got, would you use Bricks for a WooCommerce site or would you use the likes of Cadence, Blocksy or Quickly instead? I don't see any reason why you wouldn't use Bricks, especially now with one of the latest updates where you now have basic control over all the templates from the dashboard side of things, for your account settings and so on, all your main template files. I think you can also control your cart, your checkout process and so on. So I don't see any reason why you couldn't just as easily build it in as you could with something like Cadence. Well, I suppose with Cadence or Blocksy, they're themes, which is different. You're basically taking their styling, and unless you want to use the Cadence blocks and you want to control things through there, or Blocksy and use a third-party tool to actually handle the design side of things, they're very different things, I would say. What would your take on it be, Dave? Would you kind of use Bricks to do it?
I wouldn't use WordPress for e-commerce.
No, I was going to say the same thing. But if you had to, if someone put a gun to your head and said you have to use WooCommerce, you take the bullet.
If somebody made me.
Yeah.
If somebody made me, I would. Yeah, I would. I think there are probably builders that prioritize WooCommerce more. I would imagine that maybe Breakdance does. I think that Breakdance are a bit more advanced in terms of the sort of ability to style WooCommerce templates. I haven't got a clue really because it's just not an area that I go near. If I was building anything, I just don't think WordPress is suitable for e-commerce.
Unless it's like 30 products or something. I think once you kind of you start to scale, then WooCommerce is not a particularly great option for it.
Yeah, I'd use a dedicated platform if I was going to be using something which is more like, one-offs and subscriptions and products and things. I might even use something like Lemon Squeezy rather than WordPress or Thrivecart like you and I do to sell courses and consultancy and things.
Yeah. But
I'd see, certainly with the latest updates in Bricks, I'd see no problems as long as you don't have any real, custom requirements for WooCommerce. But
yeah, absolutely. Right, I'm going to take one more question and then I'm going to let Dave actually go and have some tea and have a beer and, those kinds of things.
A beer, did you say?
A beer, yeah.
Am I allowed a beer?
Well, you're going to have a half a shandy if you're a good boy.
Thank you. I'm gonna put it in this. Yeah. Gonna put it in this and everything.
I mean, gone are the days where people used to ask me on the live streams, "What beer are you drinking tonight, Paul?" Oh, I remember those days well. Anyway, so Fusion Plus TV. I don't think this is aimed at you or me, Dave, but I'm going to say I'll answer the question first, and I'll hand it over to you. Are you making or doing more tutorials on dynamic designs in Bricks? I'm assuming you're talking about using tools like Advanced Custom Fields, MetaBox, and things like that. If it is, yes, I am. There's already plenty of ones sort of planning at the moment. The whole point of the way I've kind of refocused things over the last 6 months is I want to get back into what the channel was kind of known for, which is a lot more to do with dynamic content. But I'm not going to focus on just a specific tool. I'll be using Bricks. I will be using Elementor. I'll be using Generate Blocks. I'll be using just a range of tools because I don't want to limit it to just one set, because I think once you understand how to use dynamic tools, it's very easy to transition between any of them anyway. And I quite like the differences between using something like Bricks, which gives me a lot of functionality straight out of the box for like the more intermediate advanced tools like, repeater regions, things like that. Whereas other tools for simpler sites, you don't necessarily need them. Then I think it's quite interesting to sort of take a look at those tools as well. What about you, Dave? I mean, is dynamic designs in your future?
Well, I will definitely leave most of that kind of thing to you. There are a few bits of like content ideas that I've got though, where I'm doing some dynamic stuff on my own sites, which are more kind of to make just managing the site a bit easier. Like how I'm just using custom post types and custom fields and some dynamic data, but it's just kind of like it's maybe not even that clever really, but there's a few things that I've fallen into doing which have just made managing certain kinds of content much easier. So it's less about the hardcore, classic car dealership or, that kind of big listing things plugged into third-party systems. It's more about kind of quality of life, content management stuff. So yeah, but I'll leave the heavy duty stuff to the professionals.
And when we find one of them, we'll call him in.
Boom.
But actually, to kind of elaborate upon that a little bit, I am actually toying with the idea of creating a mini or smaller course using bricks and dynamic content. So that is in the planning stages, because it's one of those things that I don't want to step on Dave's toes, which is Dave's got a sort of like a certain path that he's going with bricks, and I want to go in a different path with it. And I'd like to think that ultimately what would happen then is that they would complement each other. So anyone that has sort of done Dave's course and wanted to learn more about the dynamic side of things could then find my course would be useful, or someone that wants to kind of, they'll want to learn about the dynamic side of things, and then they want to kind of learn how to use the systems of flex, sort of the frameworks and things like that, and how to kind of transition over, would find Dave's course useful there as well. So one of the things I'm always conscious of is that I would rather courses be complementary to other creators than be the same as other creators. As I say, Dave's got a great way of teaching when it comes to those kinds of areas, and I think I've got a different set of skills when it comes to teaching those sort of dynamic-based, database kind of nerdy things. So that's an idea, and at the moment it is just that, just an idea. But okay,
I'm going to kind of one.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm going to wrap things up there a little bit. Now, first of all, if people want to find out about your course, Dave, and find out a little bit more about it, how can they go about doing that?
Shall I post a couple of URLs in the...
By all means,
in
do.
that there chat, or shall I give? I'll say I'll pop it in here. So the details of all the details of the current Bricks course that I've got are on that link that I've just dropped in the chat. Which is about the course itself. But I am running also like a free masterclass, and I'll pop the link into that. Now, the beauty of the masterclass is that it's a free class. It's kind of basically it's 3 reasons Bricks will level up your web design workflow, and it's kind of aimed. The masterclass, like I say, it's a free thing. It's about 40 minutes or so, and it's really just helping people who are currently looking for another builder. You're kind of casting around for something better. Just to kind of show them why I love bricks so much, and why just three out of many reasons why I think it's particularly worth looking at. If you register for the masterclass, and I also tell you just at the end of that class about the course as well, basically kind of offer it as the next step. If you register for the masterclass, you actually get $50 off the course. So although you can, on that first link, check out all the details of the course, if you want $50 off it, you can register for the masterclass and then go and get that discount that way.
Awesome. Now, if anybody, the links are being stripped out, Kevin's just said about it, and nothing's coming up. If you go to davefoy.com, that's davefoy.com, you should be able to find everything you need there and link to all of your products. Are you right on that one, Dave?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, actually, I could just drop you shall I drop you a link in there as well?
You can try.
But yeah, if you go to davefoy.com, you'll certainly find details of the masterclass on there. Possibly the Bricks course as well. I can't remember. Yeah, just go to davefoy.com. That's easier.
Brilliant
Let's
stuff.
keep it simple, stupid.
Exactly. My mantra, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Okay, well, first of all, let me just say thank you, Dave, for joining in this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to get you on a live stream, as always.
Thank you for having me.
And to answer a question earlier on, would we be doing more live streams with you and I on? I would hope so. I think it's one of those things that, we always have a blast when we actually get to talk like this and answer your questions. So yeah, I'm sure we will do again in the near future. And Tor's just come up with a really nice thing. So anybody that's thinking of Dave's course, I'm sure Tor just had a 50 quid being sent over to him quickly from PayPal. But Dave's course apparently is amazing. Fun. Highly recommended. So you have been warned.
Very kind.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dave. Like I say, thank you everybody for joining in tonight. Your questions, couldn't get to them all, but we tried to get as many as possible. But as always, really do appreciate you joining in, getting involved in the conversation, asking questions. If you enjoyed the stream and you enjoyed what Dave has sort of handed over tonight, all the wisdom, give it a thumbs up because it does help the algorithm understand that you actually like the content that we put out there. But as always, take care, look after yourselves, and we will see you again very, very soon. Take care.